Good morning, third graders. Our target for today is I will identify examples of the theme of hospitality in the read aloud. We're going to start by reviewing some words we'll need to know for today's read aloud. The first word is personification. Personification is an animal or thing given the characteristics of a human. An example of personification in The Wind in the Willows is Mole and Rat sharing a picnic, like humans do. Our next word is perspective. Perspective is how someone sees or experiences something. Yesterday's story was told from Mole's perspective, because the reader sees everything through Mole's eyes, knows how he feels, and what he is thinking. Our next two words are dialogue and narration. Dialogue is what characters say to each other. In the example here, you'll see dialogue written in blue. Narration is the part of the story that tells what is happening. Narration is the part of the story that is not dialogue. In this example, narration will be written in red. Another clue that lets you know a part of text is dialogue are quotation marks. If you look at the blue lettering, you'll see that it begins with special marks. These special marks are called quotation marks. They come at the beginning and end of a piece of dialogue. Let's go ahead and read the example. The two animals tumbled over each other in their eagerness to get inside. The badger, who wore a long dressing gown, carried a flat candlestick in his paw. That paragraph is all narration. It's a part of the story that tells what is happening. No characters speak. Let's go ahead and keep reading the example. This is not the sort of night for small animals to be out, he said paternally. But come into the kitchen. There is a fire there, and supper too. You can see that most of this paragraph is dialogue, because most of it is inside of quotation marks. Just 3 words, he said paternally, is not dialogue. That is narration, because it is the narrator telling us who said it, Badger, and how he said it, paternally, or in a father-like way. Excellent, third grade. Let's keep learning. What do we know? We know that a theme is an idea that comes up again and again over the course of a story. The themes that we have heard again and again in The Wind in the Willows are friendship, responsibility, irresponsibility, and hospitality. You heard when we read our target that today we're looking for further examples of hospitality. We recently began finding examples of the theme of hospitality in The Wind in the Willows. Hospitality means treating guests well and being warm, welcoming, and friendly toward them. We heard many examples of Mr. Badger demonstrating or showing hospitality. An example of hospitality was when Mr. Badger invited Rat and Mole into his home. Mr. Badger also demonstrated hospitality when he gave Rat and Mole dry clothes to wear, and when he bandaged Mole's injured leg. Mr. Badger also demonstrated hospitality when he fed Mole and Rat dinner, breakfast, and lunch, when he invited Rat and Mole to spend the night, and when he offered the young hedgehogs breakfast. After listening to our read aloud today, you will be asked to write a 4-point answer, giving examples of how the characters in today's story demonstrate the theme of hospitality. You will need specific examples of the characters demonstrating or showing the theme of hospitality. You will want to use your note sheet for Lesson 7 or a piece of lined paper to take notes today as you listen. Find the note sheet in your packet, or set up your lined paper to take notes about examples of the theme of hospitality in the read aloud. You may pause the video at any time throughout our read aloud to jot notes. You may also go back and re-listen to anything that you need. Now would be the time to find your note sheet for Lesson 7, or make a note sheet on a piece of lined paper that looks like this example. Pause the video now to find your note sheet or create your note sheet. Purpose for listening. Listen carefully to hear examples of the theme of hospitality in today's read aloud. It was close and airless, and the earthy smelling home was strong. The mole struck a match, and by its light the rat saw that they were standing in an open space. The space was neatly swept and sanded underfoot. Directly facing them was Mole's little front door, with Mole End painted in Gothic lettering over the bell pull at the side. Mole took down a lantern from a nail on the wall and lit it, and Rat, looking round him, saw that they were in a sort of forecourt. A garden seat stood on one side of the door, and on the other a roller. The mole was a tidy animal, and could not stand having his ground kicked up by other animals into little heaps of earth. Down on one side of the forecourt ran a skittle alley, with benches along it and a little wooden table. In the middle was a small round pond. We're about to hear our first example of hospitality. Listen closely. Mole's face beamed at the sight of all these objects. He hurried Rat inside through the door, lit a lamp in the hall, and took one glance around his old home. I want you to think about what it means in the story when it says that Mole hurried Rat through the door. That means that he invited Rat into his home. We know that hospitality means welcoming people into your home and making sure that they feel comfortable. When Mole invited Rat into his house, that was an example of hospitality. Pause the video now and jot down that example. Mole immediately saw the dust lying thick on everything. He saw the cheerless, deserted look of the long-neglected house and collapsed against a hall chair. "Oh, Ratty," he cried dismally, "why ever did I do it? Why did I bring you into this poor, cold little place on a night like this?" The rat paid him no heed. He was running here and there, opening doors, inspecting rooms and cupboards, and lighting lamps and candles. "What a capital little house this is," he called out cheerily. "Everything here and everything in its place. The first thing we want is a good fire. I'll fetch the wood and the coals, and you get the duster." Encouraged by his companion, the mole dusted and polished with energy, while the rat soon had a cheerful blaze roaring in the chimney. He hailed the mole to come and warm himself, but Mole promptly had another fit of the blues. "Rat," he moaned, "how about your supper, you poor, cold, hungry, weary animal? I've nothing to give you." "What a fellow you are for giving in," said the rat calmly. "Why, only just now I saw a sardine opener on the kitchen dresser, and everybody knows that means there are sardines about somewhere. Pull yourself together. Come with me now and forage." They went and foraged accordingly, hunting through every cupboard and turning out every drawer. The result was not so very depressing after all. A tin of sardines, a box of captain's biscuits nearly full, and a German sausage encased in silver paper. "There's a banquet for you," observed the rat as he arranged the table. "No bread," groaned the mole. "No butter. No caviar, no champagne," continued the rat, grinning. "And that reminds me, what's that little door at the end of your passage? Your cellar, of course." Rat made for the cellar door. and presently reappeared with a bottle in each paw and another under each arm. Now, wherever did you pick up those prints? They make this place look so homelike, they do. No wonder you're so fond of it, Mole. Tell us all about it and how you came to make it what it is. The Mole, much cheered by the Rat's fine compliments, took time to show off his splendid abode. The Rat, though desperately hungry, allowed the Mole to hold court. At last the Rat succeeded in decoying him to the table, and he had just gotten seriously to work with the sardine opener when sounds were heard from the forecourt without, sounds like the scuffling of small feet and a confused murmur of tiny voices. Now, all in a line, hold the lantern up a bit, Tommy. Clear your throats first. Where's young Bill? What's that? Inquired the Rat. I think it must be the field mice, replied the Mole. They go round carol singing regularly at this time of year. I used to give them hot drinks and supper, too. Sometimes. Let's have a look at them, cried the Rat, jumping up and running to the door. It was a pretty sight that met their eyes. In the forecourt, lit by the dim rays of a lantern, some 8 or 10 little field mice stood in a semicircle. They had red scarves around their necks, and their forepaws were thrust deep into their pockets. With bright, beady eyes, they glanced shyly at each other. As the door opened, one of the elder ones that carried the lantern proclaimed, "Now then, 1, 2, 3," and forthwith their shrill little voices rose up into the chill night air. In just a moment, we're going to hear another example of hospitality. Listen very carefully for it, and be ready to jot it down. The voices ceased, and the singers exchanged sidelong glances, but for only a moment. Then, from up and above and far away, down the tunnel they had so lately traveled, came the sounds of distant bells, ringing a joyful and clangorous peal. "Very well sung, boys," cried the Rat heartily. "And now come along in and warm yourselves." "Yes, come along, field mice," cried the Mole eagerly. "This is quite like old times. Shut the door after you, pull up and settle around the fire." What example of hospitality did we just hear? Think about what Rat and Mole just said to the field mice. You're right. The example of hospitality that we just heard was that Rat invited the field mice into the house, and Mole welcomed them warmly. Go ahead and pause the video now and jot that down. "Now wait just a minute," said the Mole, "while we—" "Oh, Ratty," he cried in despair, "we've nothing to give them." "You leave that to me," said the masterful Rat. "Here, you with the lantern, I want to talk to you. Now tell me, are there any shops open this hour of the night?" "Why, certainly, sir," replied the field mouse respectfully. "At this time of the year our shops keep open to all sorts of hours." "Then look here," said the Rat. "You go off at once, you and your lantern, and you get me—" Here much muttered conversation ensued, such as, "Fresh, mind. No, a pound of that will do. If you can't get it there, try somewhere else. Yes, of course, homemade." Finally, there was a clink of coin passing from paw to paw, and the field mouse was provided with a basket for his purchases, and off he hurried. The rest of the field mice, perched in a row on the settle, their small legs swinging, gave themselves up to the enjoyment of the fire. Now, I believe we just heard yet another example of hospitality. Think about what the Rat just did with the field mouse he was talking to. How was Rat showing hospitality? Yes, you're right. The Rat showed hospitality when he sent one of the field mice to town to buy food. This is showing hospitality because he wants to offer the field mice something to eat. So sending one of the field mice to go get food will allow that. You'll want to go ahead and pause the video so that you can jot down that Rat sent one of the field mice to go get food. As we continue reading, prepare yourself to hear yet another example of hospitality. The Rat, meanwhile, was busy examining the label on one of the bottles. "I perceive this to be ginger beer," he remarked approvingly. "The very thing. Now we shall be able to mull some ginger beer. Get the things ready, Mole, while I draw the corks." It did not take long to prepare the brew, and soon every field mouse was sipping and coughing and choking, for a little mulled ginger beer goes a long way, and wiping their eyes and laughing. As we continue reading third grade, I want you to remember that hospitality means making someone feel welcome in your home. Listen to how Mole helps the field mice feel welcome in his home. Be ready to write down that example of hospitality. "They act plays too, these fellows," the Mole explained to the Rat. "Make them up all by themselves, and very well they do it too. They gave us a capital one last year about a field mouse who was captured at sea by pirates. Here, you were in it. Get up and recite a bit." The field mouse addressed got up on his legs, giggled shyly, looked around the room, and remained absolutely tongue-tied. His comrades cheered him on, the Mole coaxed him and encouraged him, and the Rat went so far as to shake him, but nothing could overcome his stage fright. What example of hospitality did we hear from Mole? How did the Mole make the field mice feel welcome? I heard that the Mole talked with the field mice and discussed with them things they like to do, such as acting. This would make the field mice feel welcome in the home, as the Mole talks to them about themselves. So, an example of hospitality would be that Mole talked to the field mice to help them feel welcome in his home. Pause the video now and jot down that example. As we finish reading, you're going to hear one more example of hospitality. You might see the example in the picture as well. We're going to finish the story. While we finish the story, think, how is the theme of hospitality being demonstrated? There was no more talk of play acting once the contents of the basket had been tumbled out onto the table. Under the generalship of Rat, everybody was set to do something. In a very few minutes, supper was ready. As they ate, they talked of old times. They clattered off at last, very grateful indeed. When the door was closed on them at last, Mole and Rat kicked up the fire, drew their chairs in, and discussed the events of the day. At last, the Rat, with a tremendous yawn, said, "Mole, I'm ready to drop. That your bunk over on that side? Very well then, I'll take this." The Rat clambered into his bunk and rolled himself well up in the blankets as slumber gathered in him. What final example did we hear and also see in this part of the read aloud? You're right. The final example of hospitality that we heard was that Rat and Mole shared a meal with the field mice. Pause the video now and jot down that example. That concludes our story, third grade. Now we'll take a moment and review our notes to make sure that we all have the information. Let's go ahead and take a look at our note sheet. The first example of hospitality that we heard was Mole inviting Rat into his house by hurrying him inside. If you realize that I have an example you don't have, or that you just want to add to your information, go ahead and pause the video at any time so that you can add to your notes. Our next example of hospitality is Rat invites the field mice in. Another example of hospitality that we heard today was Rat bought the field mice food and drink, even though he is not at his own home. Remember, if I have something written down that you don't have written down, pause the video. Another example of hospitality we heard was Mole talks with the field mice, listens to them tell about caroling and play acting to make them feel welcome. The final example of hospitality we heard was Rat and Mole sharing a meal with the field mice. Thank you for reading Chapter 7 of our Listening and Learning Wind in the Willows with me. Have a great day, third grade.